Hi, this is Cy from Music Radar, and we're here talking about Roland's new SH-4d. Now, Roland have released a lot of bits of vintage-inspired gear over recent years. Started with the IRA range with the original TR8, followed by things like the TR8S, TR6S. Then you've got their boutique range of small vintage-inspired desktop synths and drum machines. You've got Roland Cloud, which brings us plug-in versions of things like the 808, 909, 101, and various other bits of vintage Roland gear. And now you've got Zencore things, which are things like the MC707 Groovebox, Juno X Synth, all of which use a variety of samples and synthesis modes to recreate classic sounds from Roland's back catalogue. So there's a lot of different vintage-inspired Roland instruments out there. And if you're anything like us, it kind of can get a little bit confusing and kind of make you perhaps lose a bit of interest every time that there's a new one being announced. However, the SH-4d is probably the most interesting thing that Roland have released in a few years, and we're going to talk through 5 reasons that we're particularly excited about this. First reason to be excited about this is because it's absolutely stuffed full of sounds. We've got 5 parts here, 4 of them are polyphonic synth parts, 1 rhythm track. That rhythm track gives us a full 16 sounds to play with, and then each of these synth parts here can use 11 different oscillator models. There's a load of hands-on control as well. These 4 sliders, rotaries and buttons give us a lot to play with in all these different oscillator modes. And then every single oscillator type feeds into the same modelled filter, amp and LFO section. We also got effects over here with a per tone effect applied to each synth part, a master effect, and then reverb, chorus and delay sends. Second reason to be excited about this one is that it has a really neat line in virtual analog sounds. Like a lot of recent Roland gear, we've got modes in here that are based on classic vintage Roland hardware. The main 2 are oscillator sections based around the SH-101 and the Juno 106. Now what these do is they model this oscillator section around the oscillator sections in those hardware synths, giving us controls that match those on the original instruments. The virtual analog sounds fat with a lot of heft, and it works nicely with this same synth section with this nice multi-mode filter with drive, which is great for rich analog basses, or you can go over to this Juno and find some nice Juno style swells and pads. But that's not all. We can add some more analog character to these with some of the hidden features. So if we go to shift and tone here, you'll see we've got this analog feel parameter here. And turn this up adds a bit of drift and variation. It kind of mimics the sound of an aged analog synth. We've also got this effect section here, and if we go into some of the tone effects, some of these effects here. So we've got Juno chorus here, which is obviously modelled on the classic chorus found on the hardware machines. And we can even turn the noise up, make it noisier, and change whether we've got the different modes engaged. So it's great for classic sounds like that. We've also got this final PCM mode here. And this is a kind of sample-based oscillator mode. And this gives us access to a few more sounds as well as those virtual analog ones. If we flip through the waves here, we've got a variety of sounds from real instruments, things like kalimbas, xylophones, glockenspiels, to some other samples from classic synths, organs, and various other synths, both from classic Roland and elsewhere. Third reason to be excited about this is that alongside those virtual analog sounds, it's got some really cool digital synthesis approaches on board as well. So again, these just change the oscillator section here. It all feeds through the same filter, amp and LFO section with the same effects. But what we've got in terms of some more modern sounds, we've got things like this cross FM mode. Now this is a basic 2 oscillator or operator FM mode. Where we get a nice little envelope here, along with the ability to change the wave shape of these 2 oscillators, which are set up in a modulator and carrier arrangement, and change to things like the ratio, and then the faders shape this cool easy to use envelope, which makes it really easy to kind of shape some nice little weird digital sounds. Next up, we've got a ring modulator mode, which again, kind of cool for nice little digital sounds. Then we've got a wavetable with 32 wavetables that we can select from, plus controls to control the morphing through these wavetables. A nice chord mode, which is great for those kind of classic dance music chords. Probably the most interesting though is this drawing mode. So what this lets us do is use these controls to effectively draw in our own wave shape. We can move this around and do things like create some shapes like this. Let's just initialize that so you can hear a bit better. So we can literally just use these controls to customize our wave shape. Which is a lot of fun and can quite easily create some sort of West Coast synthesis type sounds, particularly if we say, let's get a fast moving oscillator with a bit of pitch modulation. We've also got, in this matrix here, a handy mod matrix. And what we can use is this to set up a load of modulation routings from things like envelopes and aftertouch, to different parameters, which just gives us a lot of cool options for modulating and shaping sounds. So as well as doing those nice, rich Roland style virtual analog sounds, we can also do some really cool, weird digital things. Fourth reason to be excited about the SH-4d is that it's kind of a sneaky little drum synth that you might not notice initially. So you'd be forgiven for thinking, like a lot of recent Roland gear or other groove boxes like this, that the drum kit would just be giving you 16 sampled sounds. And in a way that's kind of true, but there's more to it than just playing back basic samples. So each drum part here lets us select samples, and as you can see here, we've got like an 808 kick, so there is sounds from all of those classic Roland boxes, your 808s, 909s, 707s, plus a ton of other sounds that are both percussive and also some kind of melodic and synthesizer-y sounds, all within this rhythm track. But this does more than just playing those back. So let's select a sign here first. As I said, it kind of lets us do drum synthesis. As well as having simple sample playback, we've got this pitch envelope here. And what this lets us do is use these faders to create sweeps, which means that we can do basic drum synthesis right from this oscillator here. So obviously I've just turned that simple sine wave into a basic analog style kick, just like that. But also we've got two layers here, so I can put sine in here, then let's select another wave here. I can adjust the balance. But then this also filters through to this synth section here, just like these polyphonic synth parts. Now, not every control from the synth section is available, but most of them are for each sound in our drum kit. So, for example, the high pass filter here isn't available, but the normal multi-mode filter is. So I can create maybe a snappy filter envelope with some resonance. Probably need to watch the speakers. And now I can tweak the amp envelope as well. So pretty much we've got these two sample layers, and we can use those effectively as oscillators in a kind of wider drum synthesis setup. Now that's just a really basic example of what we can do creating a kind of kicky sound, but as I said, each of these sample modes has access to a load of synth timbres, wavetables, so you can do a lot of synthesis stuff right from this rhythm machine on each of these 16 parts. And if you want to get creative, you can kind of get really complicated and do some really interesting rhythmic and percussive sound design. So the fifth reason that we're excited about this is the fact that you can do a lot in terms of sequencing and building loops and kind of on the verge of full tracks. So as we've said, you've got 4 melodic parts plus that complex rhythm generator there. And if we go through some of the stock patterns here, you can see that just from these presets that Roland have supplied, you can build quite complicated multi-part arrangements. So there's a total of 60 voices of polyphony available across the whole thing. Now that kind of depends on what mode you're using for the oscillators with the rhythm generators, but there's easily enough voices on board to create effectively whole tracks. Sequencing wise, everything is done through these buttons here and this touch keyboard here. You've got up to 64 steps of sequencing, although if we go into this edit mode, you can see that we've got also controls over speed, so you can make it 64 steps but kind of going over a lot longer depending on what rate and scale we're using. We can also change the direction of sequencing and randomize it. We can do things like add shuffle. We've also got motion recording, which means if we want to hit record here, we can start tweaking controls like that, and we're going to record that into the sequencer. We can also do things to edit various steps. So if we hold down a step, we've got velocity and gate and the note for each step. We can also set a probability, which, like probability sequencing on other things, will change the likelihood that a certain step will fire off each cycle. Then we can also use sub-steps to add flams and kind of quick rolls on each step. We can step sequence, we can record live, and there's also a cool 101 style vintage sequencing mode on board. So between all of that, the effects, there's quite a lot of flexibility enabling users to build up complex patterns and sounds. And maybe it's not quite the DAW replacement levels of something like the MPC or Machine Plus or something like that, but there's a lot of scope to build some fairly complex arrangements. So let's talk about a few things that we don't like so much on this. So let's talk about the hardware in general. So there's a lot to really like about the hardware. For one thing, it's got this cool style, which is kind of loosely based on like the late 70s SH designs, most reminiscent probably of the SH-4d, which means you've got this cool white on black styling, a nice kind of metal topped body. So it feels pretty robust, and it's one of the coolest looking things Roland have released in a while. However, there's a few things that we're not so sure about the hardware. So it hasn't got very many analog outputs. We've got our two main outs here, but there's no individual outs. And obviously having the 4 synth parts and 1 multi-part rhythm part, it would be kind of nice to be able to route some things out of different outputs, particularly for live performance. Now you can, like a lot of recent Roland gear, use your USB connection to connect it to a computer, and we can stream every single part in stereo plus the effects to a DAW. So that's really handy in the studio, but like we said, for live performance, it'd be quite cool to have analog outputs and some abilities to route things to like a hardware mixer. We do have an analog input for putting audio into the machine, but this is going straight through to the output. So there's no processing through the filter or any of the effects or anything like that. It's kind of just if you want to route a different bit of gear through to your main mix. On the hardware front also, it's not the most playable machine. So you've got loads of cool sequencing tools. It's really cool for kind of, inputting sequencing using the button sequencer. But keyboard wise, we've got this little button keyboard here, which kind of isn't too much to play with. Obviously, you can hook a MIDI controller up. We've got MIDI in and out here. And also, if we go into the menu, then we've got these system settings, and we can set up quite a few different configurations to have different MIDI channels controlling different parts, and then the ability to sync and use CC controls and things like that. So there's a lot of MIDI functionality, and it will kind of pick up things like velocity and aftertouch. But as a standalone machine, kind of feel like it's crying out for a keyboard. It's a shame that there isn't a keyboard version released straight away. I'd be surprised if Roland didn't have one in the works, because obviously it's great being able to sequence these polyphonic parts and this rhythm, but it makes you think, well, it'd be really cool to be able to kind of expressively play over the top of this. And without hooking up an external controller right now, it's not really that great for that. So other things that might be a little bit of a downer for some users, this isn't particularly expandable. So we've discussed the fact that you've got wavetables on board, we've got sample-based drums, we've got the PCM sample mode, but there's no user upload. So there's no option to upload your favorite synth wavetables. no option to upload your own one-shots for use with the drums or with the synths. You're kind of limited to what's on board. Also, while the synth engines are kind of loosely based on Roland's Zencore model, which is what's in use in things like the Juno X and the MC707, this isn't technically a Zencore synth. So unlike those where you can buy expansions and you can load new models and things into the machines, this is not going to be something that can be upgraded. So you're kind of limited to what we've got here. Saying that though, there is a lot inside of this. There's a load of great drum sounds, and you've got a lot of sound design ability based on just all of these synth models and these oscillator modes. And as we've said, the rhythm section where you can kind of do a lot of cool percussion synthesis things. So personally, I don't think it's a massive problem that you can't expand this. And I think most users will get a lot out of it before they start hitting a wall of thinking, oh, there's not enough sounds in here. You could quite happily play for hours and hours and days and make full tracks without really thinking, oh, I've used every sound on board. So I don't think it's a massive concern. So that's our highlights and lowlights of Roland's new SH-4d. There's a lot of stuff we haven't had time to go into in this little video. There's a ton of deeper features in the mod matrix, LFO setup, built-in EQs, a lot we haven't explored in these effects. There's also this demotion thing, which means that we can pick the unit itself up and move it around to modulate stuff using an XY parameter, which is kind of cool, if a little bit shaky in practice. But yeah, there's a lot we haven't had a chance to go into. On the whole, though, it's fair to say that we really like this. For the price, which I think is around the $550 mark, there's a lot of sounds in here, and there's a lot that you can get out of. It's a lot of fun to design sounds with all of these oscillator models, and there's some cool hands-on performance things you could do. So I think for the price, this is one of the most interesting and exciting things that Roland have released in a good few years.